It was the morning of my 68th birthday, and the coffee tasted wrong. I don't know how else to explain it. The coffee was the same brand I'd been buying from the Sobeys on Carling Avenue for 11 years. Same grind, same old Mr. Coffee machine with the crack on the handle that I kept meaning to replace. But I stood in my kitchen in Ottawa, watching the snow come down sideways against the window, and nothing felt like it belonged to me anymore. My son had called the night before to say he and his wife were coming over for brunch, just the three of us. A small celebration, he said. His voice had that particular warmth he uses when he wants something. I should have known then. I've been reading that voice since he was 17. His name is Philip. He's 41 now, and he married a woman named Sasha 8 years ago. Sasha is the kind of person who gives compliments that feel like assessments. "You look well, considering," she said to me at my wife's funeral 2 years ago. Considering, she said to me at my wife's funeral 2 years ago. Considering. I've thought about that word many times since. My wife, June, died of a stroke in March of 2020. 29 years we were married, and the house on Riverside Drive still smells like her sometimes, near the hall closet where she kept her coats. I don't open that closet much. When June died, things shifted between Philip and me. Subtly at first. He started calling more often, asking about the investments, about whether I'd updated the will, about the house. He asked the questions the way you ask about someone's health, when you're actually asking about something else. I answered them honestly because he was my son, and I thought grief does strange things to people. I was right about that, just not in the way I meant. The brunch was set for 11. I'd picked up lox and bagels from the deli on Bank Street, put out the good plates. I was in the front hallway pulling on my cardigan when I heard the car in the driveway. I looked through the frosted glass beside the door and saw Philip's Civic, but he wasn't getting out. He was still in the driver's seat, and Sasha was beside him, and they were talking. Close together, heads tilted in, the way people talk when they don't want to be heard. I don't know why I didn't open the door. I just stood there. I couldn't make out words through the glass. But then Sasha turned slightly and her window was cracked an inch, and I heard her say, clear as anything, "I'll keep him busy inside. You take the folder to the notary and get it witnessed before noon." Philip said something I couldn't catch. "Just go," she said. "He won't know until it's done." I stepped back from the door. I went to the kitchen. I stood over the sink, and I turned the cold tap on, and I let the water run over my wrists for about 30 seconds. Old habit from when I was a machinist and needed to think. The cold helps. Then I went and sat at the kitchen table and waited for the doorbell to ring. I need to back up, because none of this will make sense without the 14 months before that morning. After June died, I hired a financial advisor to review our estate. Her name is Constance, a sharp woman with an office near Spark Street who has been doing estate planning for 30 years and has the patience of someone who has seen every version of human greed imaginable. She's the one who first asked me, gently but directly, whether I was entirely comfortable with the secondary signatory I'd listed on my RRSP beneficiary forms. I haven't thought about it in years. Back when Philip was finishing his MBA and going through a rough patch, June and I had added him as a co-executor on a couple of accounts as a gesture of trust. A father thing. This is what family does thing. Constance laid the documents on her desk and said, "These give Philip the ability to initiate certain account transfers on your behalf if you were deemed incapacitated. Are you aware of that?" I was not fully aware of that. She didn't editorialize. She just let the information sit there in the air between us and waited for me to finish understanding it. I drove home that afternoon, and I didn't call Philip. I made a list instead. I am an engineer by training, retired from the federal government after 31 years with Natural Resources Canada. I make lists. I think in systems. The list had 2 columns. On the left, things that could be coincidence. On the right, things that couldn't. On the right, the list got longer than I wanted it to. Philip had been pushing for about 8 months at that point to have me move out of the riverside house. Too big for one person, he said. Too much upkeep. He'd found a lovely retirement residence in Kanata. He'd even taken me for a tour. It was fine. It was perfectly fine, but I didn't want to go, and every time I said so, he pivoted to costs. Dad, the property taxes alone, with your pension income, you're eating into capital every year. As if I hadn't done the math myself. He'd also introduced me to his own lawyer, a young man named with an office in Barhaven, to update my will after June passed. I went to one meeting. I asked to see draft language. Things moved faster than felt right. I told Philip I needed more time. That's when the calls started getting more frequent. And then about 6 months before my birthday, Philip mentioned something in passing that I was not supposed to notice. He said, I was just talking to someone at the bank about your GICs, and then he corrected himself quickly and said he meant he'd been thinking about GICs for his own savings. Haha. Got confused. I didn't say anything. But that night, I called Constance. We spent 2 hours on the phone. By the end of it, I had an appointment with a different lawyer, mine, not Philip's, and a plan to quietly restructure the accounts so that Philip's secondary access was removed. All of it done properly, legally, documented with dates and witnesses. My lawyer's name is Peter Hadley. He's been practicing in Ottawa for over 2 decades, and he is the sort of man who does not hurry and does not alarm and does not miss anything. He told me that what I was describing, the secondary signatory setup, the push to relocate, the introduction of a family-adjacent lawyer to redo the will, followed a pattern he'd seen before. Not always malicious, he said carefully. Sometimes just bad judgment, sometimes pressure from a spouse. But it warranted attention. He also suggested I keep a record. So I did. I kept a small notebook in the chest freezer in the garage, under a bag of frozen peas that June had labeled in her handwriting from 3 years ago. I could not bring myself to throw out that bag of peas. It turned out to be useful for other reasons. Every conversation where Philip asked about accounts, real estate, executor status, I wrote it down afterward. Date, time, what was said, what I said back. 11 months of notes. By the time my birthday came around, I had 43 entries. The doorbell rang at 11:04. I opened it and Sasha was there alone, and she said, Philip had to make a quick stop. He'll be right back. Hope that's okay. Her voice was bright in the way that costs effort. Of course, I said. Come in, coffee's on. We sat at the kitchen table. She admired the locks. We talked about her mother's hip surgery. I asked about the kids. She told me her older one, Brendan, had made the hockey team. I said that was wonderful. I meant it. Philip arrived 42 minutes later, slightly out of breath, with a bakery box of butter tarts from a place in Westboro that he knows I like. He hugged me and wished me happy birthday and said sorry for being late. Just a small errand. Not a problem, I said. We ate. It was good food. The conversation stayed light. After we cleared the plates, Philip said, Hey, Dad, I actually have something I wanted to go over with you while we're all together. Just some financial stuff. I've been working with that lawyer I mentioned. He drafted some updated paperwork just to simplify things. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. It's mostly just clarifying the execute arrangement and the POA, he said. Just housekeeping, really. He put a document on the table in front of me. It was about 12 pages. Sasha said, It's so much simpler if everything is just organized now, rather than later. I looked at the document. I did not touch it. I said, How long did it take the notary this morning? The table went completely quiet. Philip's face did something complicated. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Sasha, then back at me. What? He said. The notary, I said. You were there for 42 minutes. That's longer than I'd expect for a witnessing. Did something take extra time? He didn't answer. Philip, I said. I kept my voice even. I have spent a lot of years in meetings where staying calm was the entire job. I heard Sasha tell you to go before noon. I heard her say I wouldn't know until it was done. I was standing in the hallway when you were in the driveway. Sasha put down her fork. Dad, that's not... Philip started. I'm not angry, I said. And I meant that too, which perhaps surprised all three of us. I want you to know that I'm not sitting here shaking. I'm not going to shout. But I want you to understand something before either of you says another word. I got up and went to the kitchen drawer beside the fridge, the one where I keep the takeout menus and the batteries and the small things that don't have another home. In the back of that drawer, under a broken wine key, was an envelope. I put the envelope on the table. Inside that envelope, I said, is a letter from Peter Hadley, dated 9 months ago, confirming that I revoked all secondary account access and updated my POA and will through his office. New beneficiary designations, new executor arrangement. He's the sole contact for anything related to my estate. I paused. Whatever that notary witnessed this morning, Philip, it doesn't change anything. Philip stared at the envelope. The accounts are different now, I said. The house has a family trust structure as of last spring. Constance has copies of everything, Peter has copies of everything, and there is a third copy in a safety deposit box at the TD branch on Elgin Street in my name only. I sat back down. I want you to understand that I did not do any of this in anger. I did it because I am 68 years old. I am in good health. I have a sound mind, and it is my responsibility to protect what your mother and I built, not yours. Sasha was the first to speak. You're accusing us of... I'm not accusing anyone of anything, I said. I'm telling you what I did and why. What you were trying to do this morning, I'll leave that for you to sit with. Philip looked at the butter tart box still on the counter and then back at me, and I watched something move across his face that I haven't been able to name since. Not quite shame, not quite anger. Something in between. Dad, he said, and his voice was different now, lower. We were trying to help. I know you've told yourself that, I said. We didn't speak again for a long time. Outside, the snow had stopped. There was that particular Ottawa winter silence that falls when the wind dies and everything goes still and white. Eventually, Philip stood up and put on his coat. Sasha put on hers. I walked them to the door. We did not hug. Philip paused on the threshold and turned back and looked at me like he might say something. He didn't. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. It was my birthday. I was 68. The snow on the Riverside Drive had turned the whole street into something quiet and clean. I opened the hall closet that I never opened. June's coat was still there. Her old green parka, the one with the wooden buttons she bought at the market in Wakefield. I pressed my hand against the sleeve of it for a moment. Then I closed the closet, finished my coffee, and called Peter Hadley to let him know it was over. He said, "Happy birthday, Leonard." I said, "Thank you, Peter. I think it is." They think the inheritance is the point. What they never understand is that the point was never the money. The point was that I knew, and I was ready, and I did not let them take something that was never theirs to begin with. I've thought a lot about that kitchen table, the butter tarts in the box on the counter. The way Philip looked at the envelope like it was something he didn't recognize, even though he'd been circling around it for over a year. There's a version of this story where I say nothing. Where I open the door when they pull up, where I sit across from my son and sign whatever he puts in front of me because he is my son and I want to believe the best of him. I've known men who did exactly that, good men, careful men, in most of their lives. They just couldn't bring themselves to look directly at what was happening inside their own families. That reluctance cost them everything they'd spent 30 years building. I don't say that with superiority. I understand the pull of it. There is something in you that resists the conclusion, that keeps finding alternate explanations, because the alternative, that your own child is looking at your estate the way a stranger might, is a kind of grief that doesn't have a clean name. But I think the clearest thing I can tell you is this: protecting yourself is not the same as giving up on the relationship. I didn't change those accounts because I stopped loving Philip. I changed them because I still had enough self-respect to take my own situation seriously. June would have done the same. She was sharper than me in most things, and she would not have waited 11 months. What saved me wasn't luck. It was paying attention, and then being willing to act on what I saw, even when acting on it was uncomfortable. Constance asked me one careful question in her office on Spark Street, and I could have deflected it. I could have said, "Philip is a good kid. It's fine. Let's talk about something else." Instead, I drove home and made a list. That list, and everything that followed from it, was the work. Not dramatic work. Quiet work. The kind that happens in lawyers' offices and phone calls and a notebook kept under a bag of frozen peas. I think people underestimate how much courage that kind of quietness requires. It's easier, in a way, to have a confrontation, to raise your voice, to accuse, to make it a scene. What's harder is to see clearly, say nothing, and spend 9 months building something solid and legal and documented. To sit across from your son on your birthday and let him put the papers on the table, knowing that what's in your kitchen drawer makes those papers irrelevant. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from anger. It comes from having decided very calmly that you are worth protecting. Philip called 3 weeks later. The conversation was short. He said he was sorry. I believed him, partially. I think Sasha drove more of this than he'll ever fully admit, and I think Philip let himself be driven because it was easier than examining his own motives. That's his work to do, not mine. What I know is that I'm still in the house on Riverside Drive. June's green parka is still in the hall closet. The bag of peas is back in the freezer with the notebook removed. And on the evenings when the river is frozen and the street goes quiet, the way only an Ottawa winter can make it go quiet, I sit by the window with my coffee, and I feel not triumphant exactly. Something quieter than that. I feel like myself. That, in the end, is what they were trying to take. Not the accounts, not the house. The sense that I was still the one making decisions about my own life. I got to keep that. And it turned out to be worth more than everything else combined.